So, good morning, Arapahoe. It is good to be back with you. So, I just got to spend a week with our youth and with Pastor Jenny on a mission trip to the Hill Country, to Boerne, Texas, to help with flood recovery, to see our students lay themselves down over some troubled water. Before I say anything else, we had an amazing time amidst it all. And everybody is home, everybody is safe, and at this point, we are mostly dry by now from the week. And Pastor Jenny and Nurse Becky and Counselor Reverend Shannon and the UM Army leadership were absolutely magnificent all week, keeping us safe and centered. And so thank you all for your prayers. Thank you for your notes of encouragement. We felt and appreciated every single one of them. The mission trip plan for us was to go to the Hill Country to help continue recovery from last year's heartbreaking flash floods. Over the last year, attention came and then attention went, but the work is still not done there. And so our youth gave a week of their summer break to swing hammers for neighbors that they'd never met. That was the plan. And I packed for the plan. I packed for long days in 100-degree heat. And then it rained. And it rains. And it rains. And it rains. We went to Boerne to help recover from a flood, and while we were there, it flooded again. All right, this is how it goes. As the great prophet John Lennon said, life is what happens while you're busy making other plans. And boy, did life happen amidst our plans. But along the way, through our students, love happened too. Love happened in the mops and the flood buckets and the games that they set out for sheltering families and the patient listening, the frequent pivoting, and the excellent student preaching we heard through the week too. Yes, I said student preaching. Hold that. We'll get back to it. But along the way, I learned something. In this series, we're called Today I Learned, and today I want to tell you a little bit about what I learned about love from our youth and leaders this week. The first thing I learned is that love is flexible. Right, here's what I mean. We went down there, we stayed in First United Methodist Church of Boerne. That was our home base. It was to be our refuge and the place where we could relax for a while. But when the rain began to come, the church that was hosting us suddenly became a high water shelter for the whole community. And our students did not miss a beat. They helped transform the gym where they were sleeping into a city shelter that was available for all. They pulled out places to rest and games for kids and a rec center that they turned into a refuge. And then in Boerne, the sanctuary roof started leaking as well. Some of you here at Arapahoe may know a little bit about that. And there were our kids with wet vacs and mops in hand, vacuuming the church, right? And Arapahoe, I just want to say, as your pastor, it did my heart good to learn that if a sanctuary roof ever leaks, the next generation is ready. They are ready. And the rain kept coming, and rivers in parts of the Hill Country rose toward levels that no one wanted to remember, right? And love pivoted again and flexed and showed up in the places where it was needed. Our crew spent the end of the week assembling flood buckets and preparing and distributing food to the community. It was like the 15th plan and pivot of the week, but it was the same one love happening. Our students went from being the helpers to being hosts to being whatever hands and hearts the moment needed, and nobody pouted about the plan and the expectations. They just did whatever love asked. And here's why they could do it. Because love, the love of Christ, isn't focused on performance or perfection or the plan even. It's focused on the people. So the plan changed, but the people were still right there. And so love just loved. Apparently, love is what can happen while you're busy caring about other people, not other plans. My mom has her own personal set of Beatitudes, and one of them goes like this: Blessed are the flexible, for they shall not be bent out of shape. Yes. That's a good one. It's a good one. That was our students all week long, and so from our youth, I learned the truth of that. Love is flexible. The second thing I learned this week is deep, that love can hold what can't be fixed. So mission trip construction work has this certain satisfying appeal, right? And it has bonus points along the way because the best projects on mission trips usually begin with a sledgehammer. And so there's satisfying work through it all. And we got plenty of that along the way too. But our middle schoolers, before the rains came, so our middle schoolers got a different kind of assignments, not the flashy demo and build back construction work. They got compassion work. They were sent to help a neighbor, a sweet woman whose struggles with hoarding had grown bigger than she could carry alone. And her home and her property had filled up, and year after year with things that she couldn't let go of. And the city had been working with her for 2 years and just couldn't get it fixed. And after 2 years, it had reached the point of some very hard official steps before her. And into that walked our middle schoolers. And they didn't walk in alone, though. They walked in together. They walked in with God's love and God's grace going before them. And Reverend Shannon Hamrick, who's also a licensed counselor, went and sat with our neighbor and listened to her as the work began. And as they sat, our neighbor explained to Shannon, it's really, really hard having people that you do not know go through your stuff. All right? Yeah, she felt that. And so Shannon sat with her and listened and built a relationship. And then Shannon started introducing our middle school students to her by name. And something began to shift. Soon, she wasn't watching strangers carry off possessions. She was working with a crew that she knew and directing them. She would say, Hudson, put that over there. Isaac, that goes with this pile. Thomas, put that with the others. And then that changed to, thank you, Hudson. Thank you, Isaac. Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Miss Shannon. Shannon modeled patient care, and our students picked up the vibe, and then our neighbor picked up the vibe too. And progress started happening that 2 years of plans and pressure never produced. Not because anybody pushed harder, but because someone sat and learned her name. Because love. Was everything finished and perfect by the end? No, there was way too much to fix. Then 1 week could handle. But there was real healing and hope that began to happen right before our eyes, because a tender heart was being held in love by community. Some things may not get fixed, but they can always be loved. And it turns out that's not a lesser thing. That's everything. And so I learned that love can hold what can't be fixed. And that's not just a lesson for that day. Some things are bigger than even what our awesome youth group can do. We know that in the Hill Country, and we know that in our own lives too. Some things won't fix just with a hammer and hard work. But that's not a license to throw up our arms and leave. It's a call to throw open our arms and love, and to love for the long haul. Love stays for the long haul, I learned from our students. And it turns out our students weren't the first people to learn this long haul lesson. There's a guy in our scripture library named Paul who was in it for the long haul. And if anybody ever had big spiritual plans, it was Paul. Travel the world, build churches, carry Jesus' message of love to every known corner of the world. He had big plans. But in a letter to the church in Corinth, he opens up about something personal in his own life, something he prayed about again and again that just couldn't get resolved and fixed, that kept getting in the way of his best laid plans. And we don't know exactly what it was, but we know it hurt, and it stayed, and it lived there in his life, in this unresolved place. But it was there, as God began to work in his heart, that he heard this message from God that changed his perspective. He heard this from God's heart: my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Grace sufficient. Grace means God's loving activity in our world, in our lives. It's at work always. Divine love in action in us. And so God, in some ways, was saying to Paul, I may not be handing you the resolution you planned, but I'm never, ever leaving you alone. In fact, I'm at work in you and around you, even in those places you feel the weakest. My love is enough for this and in this. That's where my power is made perfect. And that word perfect, it doesn't mean flawless. It's the word teleos in Greek. It means whole, complete. Not in the absence of hurt or struggle, but that God's love holds us amidst it all. And even in our weakness, we experience completeness and wholeness in the midst of it. Complete in who we actually are as we're held by grace. Even in our weakness, even mid-pivot, even with the unresolved thing in our lives, you plus grace is complete. And so hear me carefully when I say that. It doesn't mean that everything happens in our life is fine or that God is the author of it. I don't think God schedules our heartbreaks or high water days. But the message is that God is present even in those hard things. And so the promise is that you are never anywhere where grace isn't. And you plus grace, no matter where you are, is complete love in God's hands. And so what we ended up doing that week was different than what we expected. But grace was in it all. And so we were all in wherever we were needed. And grace is all in for the Hill Country this week as well, too. This week stirred up so many hard memories for that community. And so please keep them in your prayers. But I heard from our neighbors that these students were hope for them. They were proof that love didn't pack up and leave. Love turned a gym into a shelter. It turned lumber into a ramp. It turned a yard into a place of healing. Love was there to stay because love is in it for the long haul. Love stays for the long haul. And I learned from our youth this week that love does it together. Love does it together. If you've ever been on one of these trips, you know one of the most beautiful things is watching our youth discover what they've got inside them and then give all that they've got for others. And so let me tell you a little bit about our crew. There was Hudson and Isaac. They were the kitchen crew captains on their team. We took Brianna, who kept the good humor going amidst the work. Ava was a friend to everyone and brought the work team together in community. Thomas and Chrislyn, amidst it all, they led us in worship this week, which was awesome. Ashlyn and Lily, worked so hard that this is the only picture of them sitting down that I could find the whole week. Monroe showed up and gave what he had, even though he felt like 20%. Becky was our camp nurse. Shannon, our camp counselor. Jenny, our fearless leader. And me, I made sure that everybody brushed their teeth. We all have spiritual gifts that we bring to this. Nobody did everything, but everybody did their thing. And that was everything. It's not just teamwork. That's the body of Christ. And then there were our 2 student preachers. Y'all, your youth can preach. And so on Tuesday night, our preacher was Lily Jackson, the amazing Lily Jackson. And I asked her, let's clap for Lily. I asked Lily, can I quote your sermon? And she said, what part? And I said, well, I'm going to start with, hi, I'm Lily Jackson, and just quote the rest of it from there. Lily told us about a brutal softball conditioning workout her freshman year, where the whole team was exhausted and pushing through the drills, and they had support players on the sidelines that were there ready to tag in at any moment. And no one called on them because everybody was too proud, too scared of looking like they couldn't hang, until one senior finally said, I can't do this alone. I need help. And once the senior had the courage to say it, the whole team could say it. And together they made it through. And so Lily helped me see that that's how God's grace often works. It comes to us in unexpected ways through other people. And so often we need the courage just to admit that we can't do it alone. We need God's help. We need each other's help. We need a friend. And those teammates on the sidelines, it's like grace waiting to be received courageously by us. God offers it, and we can be that grace for others. As Lily said, no one cares how much you know until they know how much you care. I love that. Later in the week, our preacher was Ashlyn Yarbrough. And she gave this beautiful message. She's headed to college next month, 10 hours from home. And so she reflected on what it will mean to be a stranger in a new place. And she encouraged us with this beautiful line from Hebrews that says, do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing that, some have entertained angels without knowing it. And then Ashlyn went digging in the Greek, and I could not be prouder. She discovered that angel simply means messenger. Right? And so when we welcome the stranger, so often we meet God's messengers in them. That's what happened to us. We went to Boerne to be messengers of grace, and we got messengered right back all week long. When you extend grace, you end up experiencing it, don't you? And then Ashlyn said this thing that I need to hear, maybe we all do. Because this is how grace shows up for us. And we can courageously realize God doesn't love you because you're perfect, because you're not. God doesn't love you more because you served this week. God doesn't love you less because you make mistakes. God just loves you. No ifs, ands, or buts. Our preachers taught us about grace this week, and they helped us to notice what God had been doing in and around us, and through us even, the whole time. And so today, I learned from our youth, love does it together. I learned so much more than we could put into one sermon this week, including lots of music that was new to me this week. And I learned from Chrislyn Hart lots of very old country songs as well, too. She knows all the Loretta Lynn lyrics, too. But here's the heart of it all. Love is flexible. Love can hold what can't be fixed. Love stays for the long haul. And love does it together. They taught me that this week because they lived that love. But everything our youth taught me also taught me that that's exactly what God is always doing for us. We love like that because we've been loved like that. And so in those places you feel weak or incomplete, imperfect, when your plans are interrupted or things aren't fixed, God's grace is there for you. And so are we together, your teammates along the way. Can't always promise resolution. No one honest can, but we can promise what Paul learned, what Bernie is learning, what our kids showed me. God's grace is sufficient through all the pivots, the floods, the fearful moments even. As our preacher Ashlyn put it at the end of her message, there's nothing we can ever do that separates us from God's love. No ifs, ands, or buts. Wherever you are, grace is there too. Love is holding you flexibly, faithfully, for the long haul together. Today, I learned that from our youth. Thanks be to God. Amen.